Jack Remington stood alone in the backyard of the weathered cabin, a rusted shovel in hand, the early autumn breeze brushing against his face. The air was sharp with pine and earth, and the silence of Montana's wild outskirts wrapped around him like a blanket. He had inherited the property from an uncle he barely knew, a distant relative who died without heirs, and left behind little more than land, a crumbling house, and rumors whispered by townsfolk. After the divorce and losing his job in Boise, this isolated patch of forest felt like both a punishment and a last chance. He wasn't sure why he had decided to dig a fire pit that day. Maybe it was the need to do something tangible, something grounded. Swinging the shovel into the soil was soothing. The repetitive thud, the smell of upturned dirt, it gave him a sense of control. The sun filtered through the tall pines, casting long shadows on the uneven grass as he worked. Jack dug for hours, lost in thought. He thought about his daughter, Ava, and how far away she felt now, both physically and emotionally. He wondered if she'd ever visit this place, this strange new chapter of his life. He struck a root, then another. Then, as he drove the shovel down once more, there was a sudden clang, not the dull thud of rock or the snap of wood, but a hollow, unmistakably metallic ring. He paused, wiped his brow. Jack knelt and used his gloved hands to brush away the loose dirt. The more he cleared, the more confused he became. A circular outline, maybe 3 feet in diameter, began to emerge. The surface beneath the soil was rusted, scarred with time, and bolted into the earth. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. He scraped at the edges until he found a seam, then a small, corroded handle. His pulse quickened. Curiosity pushed aside caution. He gripped the handle and pulled. At first it didn't budge, but then, with a groaning creak, the hatch shifted, lifting slightly with a heavy exhale of stale air from below. As the hatch opened just a few inches, a sudden warmth surged out. Not heat from the sun or fire, but something unnatural. It wrapped around his arm, tingled through his spine, and Jack staggered backward, dizzy. The light changed, shadows warped. Then everything went black. Enjoying the story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales just like this. Hit that bell so you never miss what's coming next. He didn't remember falling. One moment he was staring into a dark, metallic opening in the ground, and the next there was nothing. No sound, no pain, just absence. The trees stood still. The shovel lay half buried in the earth, and the rusted hatch, slightly ajar, glinted faintly in the dimming light, silent and waiting. Jack awoke on the wooden floor of the cabin, his head pounding, breath shallow, and shirt damp with sweat. It was dark outside, the kind of deep rural dark that swallows everything. He sat up slowly, blinking against the shadows, trying to recall how he got inside. The last thing he remembered was the hatch, the warmth. Then, nothing. His limbs felt weak. There was a ringing in his ears and a strange taste in his mouth like metal and ash. He pulled himself upright, stumbled into the small kitchen, and poured water into a chipped glass. The cool liquid steadied him, but not the confusion twisting in his gut. Jack grabbed a flashlight and stepped back outside. The night air was colder now, biting. He moved slowly across the backyard, back to the pit. The ground looked disturbed, but not as he'd left it. The hole he had dug was still there, but the hatch was gone, vanished or worse, buried again. He dropped to his knees, running his hands over the dirt. Then he saw it, a faint, circular outline in the soil, as if someone had closed the hatch and brushed away the evidence. Jack's breath caught. Had someone been here while he was unconscious? He grabbed the shovel and dug frantically, his heart racing. The clang of metal never returned, only packed earth. Whatever was beneath him had been sealed again, more tightly this time. The seams were no longer visible. Confused and rattled, Jack sat back on his heels. Then he noticed something glinting in the loose soil. He reached for it and pulled out a small rectangular plate of tarnished brass. On it, faintly engraved, were the words, "Property of A.L., 1944. He turned it over in his hands. The letters were shallow but deliberate. He had no idea what they meant. A.L., a name, a company. The date etched beside it gave him pause. 1944, World War II. That was over 80 years ago. What the hell was something from that era doing buried in his backyard? That night, Jack barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in that moment, when the hatch cracked open and that unnatural warmth surged through him. But now there were visions too. Brief flashes, a long corridor made of steel, voices muffled by distance, a red light blinking in rhythm, like a heartbeat. Then a man's face, blurred but solemn, watching. Jack sat up in bed, chest tight. He had never believed in the supernatural. No ghosts, no aliens, no government conspiracies. But the feeling he'd had, that sudden collapse, the visions, it all felt too real. And if it was just a hallucination, why did it leave a brass nameplate in his hand? The next morning, Jack moved slowly, drained. He avoided the pit, instead staring at it from the porch, mug of coffee in hand. He felt like a trespasser on his own land. The earth hid things, deep things, things that didn't want to be found. Inside the cabin, he laid the nameplate on the kitchen table, beside his notebook. He wrote the initials over and over, A-L-A-L-A-L. He circled the date, underlined it. Who buried something in 1944 and never came back for it? And why here, in the middle of nowhere? He told himself to leave it alone. He told himself it was probably just an old septic tank or an abandoned well cover, but he knew better. He could still feel the warmth that had surged through him when the hatch opened. It hadn't just touched his skin, it had entered him. Jack had unearthed something meant to stay buried. The following afternoon, Jack drove the 15 miles into town. His body still ached, and the strange dreams hadn't stopped, but he needed answers. His first stop was the local library, an old brick building tucked between a hardware store and a bakery. The sign outside read Clinton County Historical Library, its paint peeling at the corners. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old paper. He approached the front desk, where a woman in her 30s sat reading a worn paperback. She looked up as he approached, friendly but alert. "Hi," Jack said, holding up the nameplate wrapped in a cloth. "I'm looking for information on someone, maybe a local. Name or at least initials AL from around the 1940s. Might have been military." The woman's eyes flicked to the plate and then back to Jack. "I'm Ellie, I run the archive section. AL, huh? That's not much to go on, but we can try." They moved to the back, where rows of file drawers lined the walls, each marked with handwritten labels. Ellie was methodical, flipping through old index cards, newspaper clippings, and town registries. After nearly 30 minutes of silence, she stopped, her brow furrowing. "Arthur Lowell," she said aloud. "Born 1917, enlisted in 39, returned in 45, listed as living out near the forest's edge. Same county as your cabin." Jack leaned in. "What happened to him?" "Disappeared in 67, no death certificate, just gone. Lived alone. Some folks said he went crazy, built a bunker under his property." Started spouting off about things no one understood. Jack felt the hairs on his arms rise. Was he ever married? No record of it. No children listed either. But this was a quiet town back then. Lots of things went undocumented. Ellie glanced at the nameplate again. "Where did you find this?" "In the ground, behind my place. There was something buried there. Metal. I tried to open it, but then I passed out." Ellie's expression changed, part caution, part curiosity. "Passed out?" "I know it sounds crazy, but something was under there. Big. It had a handle, like a hatch." She looked thoughtful. "You said your place is near the forest's edge?" Jack nodded. "Then it's the same area. Lowell's land stretched into that zone before the parcels were sold off. If you've got part of his property, maybe that hatch is what he built, that bunker people talked about. But why would he build something that makes you pass out when you open it?" Ellie shrugged. "Could be chemicals, radiation. Who knows what he had down there? Some people thought he brought something back from the war, something he was hiding." Jack frowned. "Like what?" She hesitated. "I don't know. But back then people talked about secret projects, experiments, government stuff no one could explain. You hear enough stories around here, you learn when to stop asking questions." Jack leaned back in the chair. His mind was spinning. A soldier from WQ builds a hidden room under his property, then disappears. The visions, the warmth, the voices, were they connected to whatever Arthur Lowell had buried? Ellie watched him carefully. Whatever you found, you should be careful. Lowell may have been paranoid, but people said he had reasons. There were stories about men in suits visiting his place, black cars, threats, then nothing. Silence. Until now. Jack ran a hand through his hair, the weight of it all pressing down. I need to know what's down there. I can't let this go. Ellie gave a small nod. Then you'd better not go alone next time. They returned the next morning. Jack drove, the tension between them thick with silent anticipation. Ellie sat beside him, a canvas bag at her feet filled with gloves, a flashlight, a small crowbar, and an old Polaroid camera she'd dug out of the library's storage. Neither of them had much to say. The trees thickened as the dirt road twisted toward the cabin, and the morning fog clung low to the forest floor, like it was trying to hide something. Jack parked beside the porch. The ground behind the house still bore the signs of his digging, uneven patches of disturbed soil where he'd worked so hard. But now, with Ellie beside him, the air felt heavier. He led her to the pit. It was here, right here. Ellie crouched and ran her fingers along the ground. Looks like someone tried to smooth it over. I didn't, Jack said. It was open when I touched it. When I woke up, it was sealed. She nodded slowly. Let's try again. They dug side by side, methodically removing layer after layer of dirt until Jack's shovel struck something solid again. The sound echoed differently, this time deeper. With bare hands, he brushed aside the soil to reveal the same rusted metal hatch. Ellie leaned over it, her brow furrowed. This isn't just steel. This is reinforced. Jack pointed at the seam. There's a handle here. Last time it only opened a crack. He wrapped a cloth around his hand and gripped the corroded lever. It resisted, then gave way with a harsh groan, and the hatch creaked open wider than before, this time revealing a dark shaft descending straight down. A metal ladder was bolted to the inner wall, slick with condensation. A rush of cool air rose from the opening, tinged with a smell neither of them could quite name. Metallic, earthy, something else. Ellie flicked on the flashlight. You want to go down first, or should I? Jack looked at the ladder, then at her. You said I shouldn't go alone. She offered a faint smile. I meant later. But I'm here now. He exhaled sharply, then started down. The ladder creaked beneath his weight. The light from above shrank with each step, until the darkness pressed in from all sides. Ellie followed close behind. When they reached the bottom, Jack stepped onto solid ground. The flashlight cut through the shadows, revealing a corridor made entirely of steel. Walls, ceiling, even the floor, cold, seamless metal. A faint hum seemed to vibrate through the air. Ellie's voice was hushed. This isn't a bunker, not in the normal sense. They moved slowly down the corridor. The walls were lined with strange indentations, like panels or sealed compartments. Faint markings, numbers, symbols, faded warnings, were stenciled along the sides, but none in any language Jack recognized. After several yards, the corridor opened into a larger chamber. Jack froze. At the far end of the room stood a door, massive, circular, like the hatch they'd entered through, but smoother. Beside it, a panel with shattered glass and broken buttons. To the left, a rusted metal desk bolted to the wall, covered in dust. Ellie stepped forward. This is old. But not abandoned. She ran her hand over the desk, revealing a faded photograph beneath the dust. It showed a man in uniform, standing beside a structure eerily similar to the chamber they now stood in. Jack took the photo, stared at it. The man's face was hard to make out, but the insignia on his shoulder was clear. U.S. Army, 1944. He whispered, Arthur Lowell was here. They stepped farther into the chamber, each footfall echoing across the metal floor. The space was dimly lit by Jack's flashlight beam, which swept across the curved walls like a searchlight in fog. In the center of the room stood a low circular platform, and resting above it, though not touching, was something Jack couldn't explain. It was an orb. roughly the size of a basketball, smooth and dark as obsidian, yet with a faint inner glow. It hovered inches above the platform, absolutely still. No wires, no supports. It defied logic. Jack stared, breath caught in his chest. "Is it floating?" Ellie stepped closer, her voice barely audible. "There's no sound, no vibration, nothing holding it. It's like it's waiting." Jack slowly reached out. "Don't," Ellie warned, but his fingers were already inches away. The moment his skin brushed the orb's surface, the air split with a soundless surge. Jack's vision exploded into light, not from the flashlight, something internal, blinding, electric. And then, he wasn't in the chamber anymore. He stood on a battlefield, smoke curling through ruined buildings. The sky was dark with ash. Soldiers ran past him, shouting orders in garbled foreign tongues. A man stood nearby, tall, thin, with sharp eyes and a haunted face. Arthur Lowell. Arthur turned and looked at Jack directly, as if he saw him. Jack's chest tightened. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. Arthur pointed toward a steel crate being loaded onto a military truck. His lips moved, but Jack heard nothing. Then a burst of light, gunfire, and the vision cracked like glass. Jack fell backward onto the cold floor of the chamber, gasping. Ellie was at his side, shaking him. "Jack, Jack, talk to me." He blinked, coughed. The orb still hovered. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. "I saw him," Jack rasped. "Arthur Lowell, I was there." Ellie looked terrified. "You passed out." "You weren't breathing for almost 30 seconds. "I wasn't here," Jack said. "I saw a war zone. He was there. He knew I was watching. And that orb, it showed it to me." She stared at the orb. "It's not technology we know. It's something else." Jack pushed himself up, eyes still on the object. This is what he was hiding. It's what he built all this to protect. Ellie nodded slowly. "Or contain." They backed away, careful not to touch the orb again. Jack's hands still tingled, as if some of its energy lingered beneath his skin. On the desk they found a torn journal, its pages brittle but intact. Ellie flipped through them, translating the scribbled notes aloud. "They don't know what it is, only that it reacts to thought, memory, maybe time. They want to take it, but I've seen what it does. It doesn't belong in their hands. It doesn't belong in anyone's." Jack listened, each word sinking deeper. He was guarding it. From everyone. They photographed the pages, careful not to damage them further. Then Jack looked once more at the orb. "I need to understand what it showed me." "Why me?" Ellie was already leading the way back toward the ladder. "We're going to need more than answers. We're going to need to be careful." Jack hesitated, then followed. The orb remained behind them, still humming faintly, still suspended in silence. But now it had touched someone new. Jack hadn't left the cabin in 2 days. Since touching the orb, his body had struggled to adjust. He felt feverish, drenched in sweat, but his skin was cold. Food tasted like ash. Water offered no relief. He'd tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, visions returned, of war, of faces that didn't belong to him, of machines pulsing with unnatural light. Ellie had come by to check on him. She brought broth, aspirin, and printed photos of the journal pages. He barely registered her presence, lost in the fragments that now echoed through his mind. He saw Arthur again in those dreams. Only now, Arthur wasn't just witnessing war. He was inside something. A chamber, surrounded by flashing lights, speaking in whispers to people Jack couldn't see. Ellie stayed through the second night, worried about Jack's condition. She didn't sleep either. The orb was doing something to him. She could feel it. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. A shift. Something they had disturbed and couldn't now ignore. By dawn, Jack had recovered enough to sit upright and speak clearly. "It's not showing me random things," he said, voice hoarse. "It's giving me Arthur's memories." Ellie nodded. "But why you?" "I touched it." "Maybe that's all it needs." They reviewed the photos from the journal. Some passages were illegible, but others repeated key phrases: reaction to trauma, mirrors the mind, responds to intent. Over and over, Arthur had written, "It remembers." Jack stared at the page. "It's not a weapon, it's a recorder, a memory machine." Ellie's lips pressed tight. Or a parasite. That afternoon they made a quiet visit to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Mason Briggs was a broad man in his 50s, built like the trees that filled the valley, thick, weathered, and stubborn. He listened as Jack described the strange structure beneath his property, but said little, his face unreadable. When Jack mentioned the orb, Briggs held up a hand. "That's enough," Jack blinked. "You believe me?" The sheriff leaned back. "I believe there are things in this town best left alone. You're not the first to talk about strange lights, things underground, people disappearing, and you won't be the last." Ellie frowned. "You knew about Arthur Lowell?" Briggs nodded once. "He filed noise complaints in the 60s, said he was being watched, tracked. Then one day he was just gone." "Do you know what happened to him?" Jack asked. The sheriff's gaze shifted. "No body, no sign of struggle, no evidence, but the feds came through 2 days later. Black cars, no badges, told me it was classified. I was a deputy back then." Jack leaned forward. "Did they take anything?" Briggs paused. "That I couldn't say." "They didn't talk much." He stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thin manila folder. He handed it to Jack. Inside were grainy photos, Arthur Lowell, younger, always alone, and reports, surveillance notes. One in particular stood out. Subject believes object is sentient, refuses transfer, exhibits signs of neurological stress following exposure. Ellie looked at Jack. "Just like you." Briggs closed the cabinet. "I'm telling you now, leave it alone. Whatever that thing is, it's not meant for us. Not for you, not for anyone." But Jack couldn't. That night, back at the cabin, he sat near the pit, staring at the dark hole leading down to the orb. He could feel it again. Not physically, but in his thoughts, like it was still sharing something, reaching. Jack whispered into the night, "What do you want?" There was no answer, just the wind through the trees. But somewhere below, the orb pulsed. Ellie returned to the library archives the next morning, driven by unease. Jack was changing, not in obvious ways. He still spoke, still moved, but something in his eyes had grown distant, like his focus was slipping further from the present. She needed answers, and she was convinced the key lay in Arthur Lowell's past. Digging deeper than before, Ellie pulled files that hadn't been opened in decades, boxes labeled private requests, local intelligence, and unsorted military contacts. Most of it was junk. But then, in a battered envelope marked Lowell Arthur, she found something different, a set of carbon-copied letters, typed, faint. One addressed to a Dr. William Crenshaw, Department E. Langley, dated July 1947. Another marked Return Undeliverable from the Department of Energy, 1963. The letters detailed strange behavior, unexplained magnetic fields around the property, and Arthur's warnings about unauthorized visitors. Ellie's heart skipped when she unfolded the last one, a handwritten page in Arthur's own scrawl, likely never sent. It read, "If you're reading this, I've failed. The object isn't stable. It reflects trauma, distorts time, reacts to consciousness. I can't destroy it, I can only delay them." She copied the note and headed to the cabin. Jack was outside again, standing near the pit, eyes fixed on the tree line. When she called his name, he turned slowly. His expression was neutral, distant. "You look worse," she said, approaching carefully. "I feel fine," he replied, though his voice betrayed the opposite. She showed him the copied letter. He read it once, then again, slower. "It reacts to consciousness," Jack repeated. "I think I'm beginning to understand that." "Jack," she said cautiously, "you're not sleeping, you're barely eating. The more time you spend near it, the worse you get." He shook his head. "You don't get it. It's showing me things for a reason." "And what reason is that?" she asked. He hesitated. "It wants me to remember, or maybe it wants to remember through me." Ellie frowned. "Jack, this isn't healthy. That thing might be alive or something worse. You can't just keep going back to it." But Jack was already walking toward the pit, Later that night, Ellie returned to her apartment and pulled up digitized newspaper records. Searching Arthur Lowell's name brought up the same basic details. But then she cross-referenced him with disappearances and unauthorized visits. A pattern emerged. Strange reports every few years near the Lowell property. Missing hikers, odd light sightings, power surges. The most disturbing was from 1984. 2 federal contractors vanished near old mining site. No bodies recovered. Investigation closed. The location was marked in the county grid, less than a mile from Jack's cabin. Meanwhile, Jack sat at the kitchen table staring at the orb's photograph. His hands trembled. The voices had grown stronger, clearer. They weren't in English. They weren't in any language, yet somehow he understood. They whispered of memory, of containment, of fear. Jack closed his eyes and whispered back, "What are you?" And the voice replied, not in sound but in certainty, "I am what was left behind." He jolted upright, heart pounding. Ellie returned the next morning with the new findings, but Jack barely acknowledged her. He was deep in notes, sketches, half-formed maps. "Jack," she said firmly, "listen to me. There are disappearances tied to that land. People who were never found. You're not special to it. You're just the next one." Jack looked up, eyes glassy. "Then I have to find out why." 2 unmarked SUVs arrived in town just before noon. They parked outside the old sheriff's office, and 4 men in dark suits stepped out. No insignia, no visible identification. They wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky and carried thin black cases. Sheriff Briggs watched from inside, his jaw tightening. He'd seen men like them before, long ago. When Arthur vanished, they didn't ask questions, they issued statements. They said they were from a federal environmental agency investigating possible contamination. Briggs wasn't convinced, but they had papers, real ones, signed, sealed. They knew Jack's name. Back at the cabin, Jack was pacing. Ellie had just returned from the library when she spotted the same SUVs creeping up the road. She burst inside, breath short. "They're here. 4 men. Suits. I don't like the look of them." Jack moved fast. He grabbed the journal pages, his notes, the photo of the orb. "They'll be looking for this. I need to move it." "Move it?" she said. "You're not thinking clearly." "I have to protect it," Jack snapped. "You read what Arthur wrote. They can't have it." Ellie hesitated, then opened the cabinet beneath the sink and handed him an old camping pack. "Then hide it far, somewhere they won't think to look." Minutes later, Jack wrapped the orb in thick canvas, tucked it in the pack and disappeared into the trees. The forest was cold and quiet, absorbing his presence like it had done with so many others before. He hiked uphill until he reached a craggy outcrop above the eastern ridge. There, behind a curtain of moss and stone, he found a narrow crevice, a natural fissure from long-forgotten tectonic shifts. He wedged the orb deep inside, covered it with rock, and carved a crude mark into the bark of a nearby tree. By the time he returned, the men in suits had already begun their sweep. They questioned Ellie first, bland, rehearsed questions about Jack's recent behavior. Any signs of mental instability, concerns for public safety. She played dumb, said he'd been working on landscaping and reading a lot. Sheriff Briggs arrived mid-interview. "You got a warrant?" The lead agent didn't answer directly. Instead, he handed over a heavy envelope and said, "You don't want to get involved in this, Sheriff. It's not local." Briggs stepped between the agents and Ellie. "Then maybe you shouldn't be here either." The agents eventually left without searching the forest. But the message was clear. They knew something and they weren't finished. That night, Jack and Ellie reviewed what remained of the journal. A final page contained a diagram. Circles, lines, symbols neither recognized. At the bottom, fail-safe sequence. Jack traced the lines with his finger. "It's a key, a shutdown, or maybe a lock." "We need to find out how it works," Ellie said. But before they could examine it further, headlights flared outside. The agents were back, this time searching the cabin. One produced a document signed by a judge in Missoula, authorizing a full inspection for hazardous materials of unknown origin. Jack tensed. Ellie stepped in. "Anything found on this property is private under state inheritance law, unless deemed an immediate public threat." The agent turned toward her. "Then let's hope it's not." They tore the cabin apart for over an hour. They found nothing. Jack had hidden everything worth taking. When they left, Jack watched the trees sway under the wind, the same wind he'd felt on the day he unearthed the hatch. Something had changed. The orb was no longer just an anomaly. It was now a target, and Jack had become its protector. It was Ellie who found the letter. Tucked inside the back cover of the journal, folded so tightly it looked like part of the spine, was a single yellowed envelope. The handwriting on the front was faint but legible. To the next one who finds this. Inside was a short letter. The ink had bled at the corners, but most of the words remained. I have tried to contain it, to learn it, to reason with it. But it does not think the way we do. It sees time differently, memory differently. It is not a weapon. It is a vessel. And if you're reading this, it means they've come again. They won't stop. Don't trust them. Don't give it up. And when the time comes, follow the fail-safe. Bury it deeper than before. Burn this place if you must, but never let it reach them. Arthur Lowell Jack read it 3 times, his jaw clenched tighter with each pass. Ellie whispered, he knew this would happen again. Jack nodded. He built all of this knowing it wasn't permanent. He wasn't hiding it from the world. He was hiding the world from it. They sat in silence, the weight of Lowell's words hanging between them. That evening they descended into the chamber once more. The orb remained untouched, buried in the rocks above. But now they were searching for the second tunnel, Arthur's final mention, fail-safe. Jack used the diagram from the journal, matching angles and steps from the main platform. Behind one of the smooth wall panels, he found a shallow seam. With Ellie's help, they pried it open. A narrow passage extended into the dark. The air inside was colder. The walls here were unfinished, stone and metal fused in unnatural ways. It sloped downward gradually, and as they moved, the hum they'd felt before began to pulse stronger like a heartbeat. At the end of the passage, they found a second room, much larger than the first. It was circular, lined with machinery long since corroded, but in the center was a single chair facing a dead console, and beside it, a panel of strange switches and dials with labels neither of them could read. Jack ran his fingers over the controls. This is it. Ellie stared at the panel. How do we know what to press? We don't, not yet. They took photographs of every detail, then returned to the surface. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. The voices had changed. They no longer whispered. They beckoned, and they called him by name. The next morning, a knock came at the door. Jack opened it cautiously and was met by a man he didn't recognize. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, sharp eyes, worn jacket. He extended a hand. David Lowell, Arthur was my father. Jack froze. I thought he had no family. David smiled tightly. He didn't talk about me, and he never wrote me back. But I know what he was guarding. I know why he disappeared. Ellie stepped forward. Why are you here now? David's gaze flicked to her. Because I've been watching. Because I know what you found. And because it's not just the government that wants it. Jack's stomach turned. Who else? David didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, a hand-drawn copy of the fail-safe diagram. I've been following the pieces for years. I came close once, back in '97, but now it's different. Now it's awake again. And I think you know that. Jack stepped back, distrust flooding his chest. What do you want? David held his stare. To make sure it doesn't destroy everything. Jack didn't trust him. David Lowell stood calmly by the porch, hands visible, posture non-threatening. But Jack sensed something behind the stillness, something calculated. He looked like a man used to waiting for things to go wrong. Ellie stepped forward. If you've really been following this for decades, then you know what it does to people. David nodded. I saw what it did to my father, but I also saw what it showed him. Jack folded his arms. What does that mean? It means the orb isn't just some alien artifact or secret weapon, David said. It's a mirror, a living archive. It absorbs memory, replicates emotion, bends time. But if it bonds with the wrong mind, someone unstable, it can distort more than just thoughts. It warps reality around them. Jack's eyes narrowed. How do you know all that? David hesitated. Because when I was 13, I touched it, just once before my father sealed it away. I saw things I wasn't meant to see. And I spent the next 20 years trying to forget. Ellie looked between them. Then why come back? David exhaled. Because it's awake again. And you... He turned to Jack. You triggered it. You're its new carrier. And that makes you a target. The silence after his words was deafening. Ellie broke it. We found another chamber. There's a panel. A failsafe. Can it shut it down? David nodded. It can neutralize the resonance. Cut the link between object and host. But once it's used, the orb won't be dormant. It'll become reactive. It'll seek again. Jack stepped back, shaking his head. That's not a solution. That's a reset. It's the only way to stop it from expanding, David said. You've felt it, haven't you? The way time folds in on itself? The dreams that don't feel like dreams. Jack didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence confirmed everything. David's expression shifted. They'll come for it soon. They always do. But this time, they'll come to extract, not contain. We have days, maybe less. Jack looked at Ellie. We need to go back down. Finish what Arthur started. That evening they descended into the second tunnel, Jack, Ellie and David. The narrow corridor was colder now. The hum had deepened, become a low thrum that vibrated in their bones. The central chamber looked unchanged, but Jack sensed the pressure in the air had thickened, like static just before a lightning strike. The orb, though still buried in rock above, pulsed in the back of his mind like a heartbeat echoing through metal walls. They approached the failsafe panel. David reached for the switches. Wait, Jack said. How do we know this won't kill me? David paused. We don't, but I can guide the sequence. If the connection's shallow enough, you'll survive. Jack stared at the blinking lights, the unreadable symbols, the arcane system of switches arranged like a puzzle from another mind. He took a breath and stepped forward. I'll do it. Ellie's hand gripped his arm, but he gently pulled free. This started with me, it ends with me. David began the process. He called out each move, each symbol, his hands never touching the panel. Jack flipped the switches exactly as instructed. The air grew hotter, then colder. A deep vibration rolled through the floor. Somewhere far above, something groaned. The final switch stuck halfway. Jack forced it. A sudden surge of light burst through the chamber. Jack screamed. Once, then fell silent. Ellie shouted his name. David rushed to his side. Jack was breathing barely. His eyes fluttered. Then he whispered two words. I saw everything. Jack lay on the floor of the chamber, unmoving. His skin was pale, his breath shallow, but his eyes, when they finally opened, were not the same. Something behind them had changed, something deep and wordless. Ellie knelt beside him. Jack, can you hear me? He nodded weakly. I saw it all. Not just memories, timelines, lives, the orb. It's not just a recorder. It's a gate, a convergence of every mind that's ever touched it. David looked shaken. You survived the failsafe. That shouldn't have been possible. Jack sat up slowly, his movements heavy, deliberate. It didn't cut the link. It deepened it. I think it let me in. Ellie helped him to his feet, eyes scanning his face. What do you mean? I don't know how to explain it. I saw Arthur, yes, but also people before him, others who touched it, scientists, soldiers, even civilians. I saw what it did to them, how it learned them, became them. But I also saw something else. It's hiding something. Something it fears. David's expression hardened. That means it's sentient, we were right. Jack shook his head. It's more than sentient, it's accumulative. It doesn't just copy memory, it remembers it better than the original mind ever could. Before they could say more, they heard movement above. Footsteps, voices. Then a sharp metallic clang, the sound of the outer hatch being opened. David grabbed his bag. They're here. Ellie's eyes widened. Already? Jack stood fully, unsteady but alert. They tracked us. Probably followed David the moment he showed up. David clenched his jaw. Then we don't have much time. They backed into the secondary tunnel, dimming their lights. Through the crack in the wall, they saw flashlights dancing across the main chamber, beams slicing through dust. Voices murmured in clipped tones. Boots clanged on steel. Jack recognized one of them, Agent Stokes. He'd spoken during the cabin search, cold, clinical, determined. And now he was here, deep underground, leading a retrieval team. Stokes approached the empty orb platform. "It's gone. Check the upper layers. It's nearby." Another agent replied, "We've got thermal traces. Someone was here recently." "Possibly 3," David whispered. "They don't know we've activated the sequence." Ellie glanced at the panel. "Should we trigger the final lock?" Jack hesitated. "Not yet. I need to hear what they're saying." They crept closer, staying hidden behind the curved wall. Stokes spoke again. "Orders are clear. Recover the asset. Terminate secondary contacts if necessary." Jack's blood ran cold. "Terminate," he whispered. "They're not just here to take it. They're here to silence anyone who's touched it." Ellie's face paled. "We have to move." But David stayed frozen, eyes on the leader. "He was there in 97. He's one of them, one of the originals." Jack looked at him. "What?" "I saw his face once, when I broke into the Langley files." Stokes has been following this since before we were born. Suddenly a noise echoed through the chamber, metal scraping. One of the agents had found the secondary tunnel entrance. "Over here!" the agent shouted. Jack didn't wait. "Now! The fail-safe!" They sprinted back into the console room. Jack slammed the final sequence into place. Lights along the wall flickered, then went black. Behind them the tunnel collapsed. The agents shouted. The sound of rubble crashing drowned out everything. Silence followed, then a single, dull tone, a pulse of finality. David slumped against the wall. "We bought time, that's all." Jack wiped sweat from his brow. "That's all we ever had." They emerged from the emergency tunnel hours later, crawling out through a fissure near the eastern ridge, their clothes torn, lungs filled with dust. The night had fallen, and the moonlit forest felt eerily still. Jack collapsed near the tree line, catching his breath, while Ellie and David scanned the horizon for signs of pursuit. There were none. The agents were trapped behind the collapse, or so they hoped, but it wasn't over. The next day Ellie drove into town under a false errand. She needed to know if any word of the search had leaked into the public. At the cafe, she overheard 2 men discussing the black vans that had parked outside the library late last night. One of them swore he saw men in suits removing boxes of files. Ellie's heart sank. They were erasing traces, or worse, rebuilding the narrative. Meanwhile, David and Jack sat in the cabin, reviewing the remnants of the journal and David's personal notes. There was one name that came up again and again in the margins: Dr. Crenshaw, Langley, Department E. David muttered, "I always thought he was just a ghost, a myth tied to deep state programs." But he knew Arthur. "That makes him real," Jack pointed at a footnote. "He was part of the original containment team. That means he saw the orb before Arthur took it." Ellie returned in the late afternoon, furious. "They've been to the library. They took everything related to Arthur Lowell. Not borrowed, removed. The clerk said they had a federal directive." Jack stood, jaw tight. "Their cleaning house," David frowned. "We need leverage, something they can't erase." Ellie pulled out a small device from her coat pocket. "I followed one of the men from the library. He made a call in his car. I recorded it." She played it back. The voice was unmistakable. It was Agent Stokes. "We found the second tunnel, but the failsafe was triggered. We lost 4 men. No contact with the lower unit. If we can't extract the subject, we'll shift to elimination protocol." David looked up. "They're done playing. If they can't retrieve the orb, they'll wipe the witnesses." Jack's voice was steady. "Then we give them someone else to chase." That night, while David and Ellie prepared copies of the recording and journal scans, Jack disappeared into the forest. He took the orb with him, packed tight in a lead-lined container salvaged from the emergency chamber. He hiked north into the old mine territory, long abandoned and unstable. By dawn, he reached an old shaft and hid the container beneath a fallen support beam, marking the location only in his memory. When he returned, Ellie was waiting. "Where did you go?" Jack didn't answer. "It's done." But as they prepared to send the evidence to multiple press outlets and legal contacts, David was gone. At first they thought he was checking the perimeter, but hours passed. Then night fell. Jack searched the woods, calling his name. It was Ellie who found the note tucked under her windshield wiper. "You did your part, but I can't let this die here. I'll finish what my father started." With it was a second message, an encrypted file directory labeled Langley Drop, Project Inheritance. Inside were surveillance files, photos of the chamber, and names. One of them was Agent Stokes. Jack stared at the screen, expression unreadable. "He's going to expose them," Ellie said, "or he's going to sell it." Ellie met his eyes. "Do you think he's one of them?" "I don't know," Jack said quietly. "But if he isn't, he's becoming what they fear most, someone who understands too much." Jack spent the next day in silence. The note from David played over and over in his head. "I'll finish what my father started." It wasn't a promise, it was a warning. David believed he alone understood the orb's purpose, but Jack knew better. The moment the failsafe activated, something shifted inside the orb and inside him. It wasn't just energy, it was memory, personality, intent. Ellie paced the cabin, trying to reach David through the encrypted channels he'd used. Nothing came back, no signal, no trace. She was beginning to doubt whether he ever intended to return at all. "We need to decide," she said finally, placing the flash drive on the table. "We release this, everything, the files, the names, the recordings, and take whatever comes." Jack nodded, but slowly. "There's something I haven't told you." Ellie froze. "What?" "When I touched the orb the last time, I didn't just see the past, I felt it. Not like a memory. Like I was part of it. Like it was becoming part of me." Ellie sat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that it's not done. It didn't want to be shut down. It let us trigger the failsafe, because it wanted to move, into me." The silence that followed was suffocating. "Jack," Ellie said carefully, "you're not thinking clearly." "I am," he replied, "clearer than ever. That thing, it doesn't destroy, it collects. It preserves, and when it finds someone capable of carrying it, it bonds." Ellie stood, heart pounding. "Are you saying it's inside you?" Jack looked at her, not with fear, but certainty. "I don't hear voices anymore. I am the voice now." The words hung in the air like smoke. "You have to fight it," Ellie whispered. "I'm not fighting," Jack said, "because I understand it now. It doesn't want to harm anyone, it wants to survive. But survival means adaptation, and I'm the adaptation." Ellie stepped back. "Then you can't stay here, you can't let them find you." "I know," Jack said. "That's why I have to disappear. But what if it's using you? Then I'll keep it from everyone else." Jack spent the night packing. Ellie offered to help, but he declined. She watched him work, steady, quiet, resolved. When dawn approached, Jack stood on the porch one last time and looked out over the forest. "They'll never stop searching," he said. "I know," Ellie replied, "but as long as they don't know where it is, they'll never control it." He looked at her, a trace of a smile. "You were the only one who didn't run. Thank you for that." Ellie's voice cracked. "Be careful, whoever you are now." Jack gave a slow nod. "Tell them I burned the notes. Tell them I went east. Let them chase shadows." She tried to memorize his face, knowing she might never see it again. Then he was gone, into the trees, into the fog, into legend. Later that day, Ellie drove to the post office. She mailed out 4 packages, one to a trusted journalist, another to a retired professor, one to a human rights watchdog, and the last to an independent encryption expert. Each package contained a version of the truth. She watched them disappear behind the counter, heart heavy but steady. Back at the cabin, she deleted every trace from her laptop, wiped every document, burned every page that hadn't already been copied. She stood outside and stared at the sky, where the clouds gathered slow and thick. She didn't know where Jack had gone. She only knew what he had become, and somewhere deep in the forest the orb pulsed still, quiet, patient, alive. 2 days passed without word. Ellie checked the news obsessively, waiting for any mention of the files she had released. Most platforms stayed silent. One article surfaced briefly on an obscure site. Unknown object discovered in Montana tied to Wobbuto 2 project, but it was quickly taken down. Then, late one night, she received a text from a burner number. "They're coming. Leave now." She didn't need to ask who sent it. Within 30 minutes, unmarked vehicles were seen near the county line. Local radio chatter went dead. Internet slowed. The agents weren't hiding anymore. She fled before sunrise, leaving behind the cabin, the forest, and the life she thought she'd rebuilt. The last thing she saw in her rearview mirror was smoke rising in the distance, thick and black, too heavy to be from a campfire. They were erasing everything, but they were too late. The flash drives had already been mirrored, the contents distributed across dozens of accounts. The orb was gone, buried in a location only Jack knew, and Jack himself vanished, off-grid, untraceable. Or so she thought. 1 week later, in a small village in northern Canada, a man arrived on foot, silent, watchful, polite. He offered no name, only asked if there was work. The locals accepted him quickly. He kept to himself. No digital trail, no contact. And every night, under a tarp in the woods, he spoke aloud to no one. Or so they believed. Jack had become the orb's final chamber. He knew now what it needed. Not containment, not destruction, but distance, time, solitude, so it wouldn't be weaponized. So it wouldn't corrupt. But others still searched. Agent Stokes survived the tunnel collapse. Months later, he resurfaced at a private intelligence firm in Virginia. He gave no interviews, no statements, but a photo surfaced briefly, Stokes in a boardroom, standing beside a new investor. David Lowell. Ellie saw the image on a whistleblower forum and felt her stomach turn. David hadn't gone to expose the truth. He had used the truth to leverage power. He hadn't finished what his father started. He had become the opposite. The documents now carried his name. The files Arthur had written in fear, now labeled David Archive Initiative, sanitized, repackaged. Ellie watched from afar in a quiet coastal town. She kept no phone, used no bank. She lived in the margins. Occasionally she'd hear about strange weather anomalies, localized memory gaps, missing time. She always wondered, was it Jack, still alive, still carrying? Or was the orb beginning to reach? One night she received a package, no return address. Inside was a small flat disc, black, smooth, warm to the touch. Along with it, a note. If you ever feel it waking, run. Don't try to reason. Just run. It wasn't signed. She buried the disc beneath the cliffs the same night, whispering goodbye through tears she didn't understand. And across the world, the search continued. Black vans, closed-door meetings, scientists with hidden clearance. Satellites flagged unusual electromagnetic patterns in remote areas, but the data was scrubbed before it reached public servers. Every time a lead surfaced, it vanished. But legends grew, stories of a man who never aged, of dreams shared by strangers miles apart, of forest shadows that whispered in languages long dead. People gave him names, the Keeper, the Watcher, the Man Without Time. But Jack no longer called himself anything. He was no longer one voice. He was thousands, memories intertwined, looping endlessly through a mind that wasn't entirely human anymore. And every night, under the trees, beneath the stars, he listened to the orb, to the echoes, to the past repeating. Years passed. The world changed as it always does. Governments rose and fell, secrets traded hands, truths rewritten. But the orb remained hidden, buried beneath layers not of earth but of silence. Stories persisted in whispers. A cabin lost to fire, a man no one could trace, files leaked and suppressed, eyes watched from shadows, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. In the quiet town near the Montana border, the locals still spoke of strange lights. They told tales of a figure that moved through the trees without sound, of dreams that came in flashes, memories not their own, and sometimes they left offerings at the edge of the old forest, just in case. Ellie never returned. She settled on the coast, grew older, lived simply. But not quietly, she became a storyteller, never revealing too much, just enough. And the children would gather by lantern light, listening to her speak of memory, of time, of a man who found something beneath the ground that should never have been found. And how it changed him. She never said his name, but in her heart she remembered every detail. Once, many years later, she found a package on her doorstep. Inside was a single stone, perfectly round, cold, familiar. Along with it, a photo, an untouched landscape in the northern wilds, mountains behind, pine trees in front, no message. But she understood. He was still out there, still carrying, still guarding, and though the world tried to forget, something in the air never let it go. A hum beneath the wind, a whisper in the static. People dreamed in echoes they couldn't explain. Governments ran simulations they could never finish. The orb was never meant for us. That truth remained. Jack's fire pit never became a fire pit, but in a way, it burned brighter than anything else could have. It lit a path into memory, into silence, into consequence. He was a man who lost everything and found something no one could control, not even himself. And he chose to protect the world from it, even if it meant losing who he was. Because sometimes the most dangerous things aren't weapons or monsters. Sometimes they're truths too vast to hold. And the men who carry them are the ones who vanish into legend. Jack Remington became one of them. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories just like this. And if you're ready to keep exploring the unknown, click on the next video that just appeared on your screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.